Thank you for joining me for the Me and White Supremacy virtual pilgrimage. It's week 22, and I'm the Reverend John Borthwick, and over the last 21 weeks, I've been encouraging my congregation here at St. Andrew's in Guelph to consider the work of Layla Saad. She's written a book called Me and White Supremacy, and it was originally written as something that would engage people on Instagram for 28 days. I've taken a bit of a longer approach to this work and have invited my congregation to join me as we reflect each week on the question that she asks with each chapter as she goes forward. It's been an amazing journey of reflecting, uncovering, discovering really some of the things within my own self, and certainly in some of the reflection partners I've had to offer their thoughts and their thinking and their experience with some of the material that we're engaging. So I'm very grateful to everyone who's joined us thus far. We're on the last leg, the last 7 weeks of this journey, and it's been an amazing experience thus far. Today is something that I'm probably going to say I feel a little out of my depth with, and so I'm going to lean into Layla's material just a little more than I might usually lean into it as I reflect. But there's a couple of concepts I really want to get out and really want to make sure that we're hearing these concepts as we reflect on this material today. The concepts that are impacted and brought forward by this particular chapter come from the question, what is white feminism? And as I listened to Layla talk about this part of the book and read it again from the text itself, what I found fascinating was some of the themes that we've picked up on all the way along already. And so with the question, what is white feminism, really what the experience of BIPOC or BIWOC, Black, Indigenous, women of color, have had over the centuries related to feminism specifically, is an invitation that when BIWOC encounter or engage in the conversation around feminism, that white women will say or encourage or suggest or push aside, or however you want to describe it. But essentially, the struggle towards the goals of feminist equality, parity, justice around a variety of different issues within feminism. BIWOC, as I understand it from Layla, are basically told that they need to set aside their race as a part of the conversation. That it's really about gender and sexism, and it really isn't about race. That they're asked, they're told that by bringing up the race conversation, it makes it divisive within the conversation around feminism. And it's actually white feminists saying to BIWOC feminists, I suppose, that you need to make yourself raceless as you join us in solidarity in this conversation or in this movement. And there's many examples throughout history, and she touches on a couple around, voting rights and things like that as a part of this reflection on the chapter. And like I said at the beginning, I believe I'm a little out of my depth in some of this material. I want to perceive myself as someone who would even call oneself a feminist, but I know I need to do a lot more work around understanding the nuance to all this. And that's where I want to touch on this one phrase or this one word that's used, because it's not one that we've used too much throughout this pilgrimage thus far. And it's the word intersectionality. Intersectionality. And it's important, and a very important word as we engage in the work of antiracism. And so I literally just want to pull up a couple of things that Layla talks about related to intersectionality when it comes to the conversation around feminism and this definition of what is white feminism. first of all, the definition around white feminism. It's really, as she explores it, an extension of white supremacy, because really what the goal is to become, to have parity with white men. And this idea that in order to get that parity with white men, one might push aside other women. BIWOC have been the victims often, because the conversation doesn't actually engage in, well, what about say parity between white women and black women, or indigenous women, or women of color? What does that look like? Or the experience of BIWOC in the workplace versus the experience of a white woman who holds white privilege. And so it's an interesting conversation around white feminism and feminism as a whole. And I just want to touch on that first, and then leap into this concept called intersectionality, because for some it's really a challenge to figure out, a challenge to sort of see it this way. But she quotes a lawyer, a law professor, and a civil rights advocate named Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. She's the woman who essentially came up with this definition called intersectionality, and I want to quote the book here. She says that Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw says that intersectionality is a framework that helps us to explore the dynamic between coexisting identities and connected systems of oppression, particularly as it relates to gender and race and the experiences of black women. Crenshaw explains it this way. Intersectionality simply came from the idea that if you're standing in the path of multiple forms of exclusion, you are likely to get hit by both. These women are injured, but when the race ambulance and the gender ambulance arrive at the scene, they see these women of color lying in the intersection, and they say, well, we can't figure out if this was just race or just sex discrimination. And unless they can show us which one it was, we can't help them. Intersectionality gives us a way of practicing feminism that is anti-racist, but intersectionality is not something that can be reached without a constant and unwavering commitment to anti-racist practice. And though the term intersectional feminism is now used to talk about how people are impacted by systems of oppression, not just gender discrimination and racial discrimination, it cannot be overstated that without a firm commitment to centering BIPOC, intersectionality is meaningless. And so as I reflect on this week's chapter, I want to really take in this idea and concept of intersectionality as we engage in the work and the practice of anti-racism, that we need to think about all the ways in which someone presents themselves as an identity in the world, whether that's gender or sexual orientation, class, race, whatever that might be, that in this mindset that is white supremacy, it's fixated on this consistent phrase that I hear throughout the book and I've heard throughout my life that says that this particular situation isn't about what you, the other, thinks it's about. It's only about this. And the ways in which, as someone who has privilege and as someone who is white, the way in which we have this fixed mindset of how we navigate the world around us, and that others need to adapt, comply, not really come alongside, but meld into our way of seeing the world. And that's essentially the definition of white supremacy, that there's one way of seeing the world, and the focus, the center, is always white. So that's where I'm continuing to do this work. That's not easy, that's pretty hard, that asks me to ask more questions, to dig more deeply into my own self and into the systems that I navigate each and every day. So thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you again next week.